So I wear several hats. WZZA Radio, Muscle Shoals Broadcasting is how I butter my bread. This is my family's radio station. My parents did not believe in child labor laws, so I've worked here all my life. I remember being a child and even on Christmas morning, Dad calling and interviewing us, and we would tell him what we got for Christmas over the radio. I grew up here, but I was also very competitive, so I wanted to learn every aspect of this business. So anything from engineering to recording commercials to creating news to or reporting news, creating newscasts to the creating the logs, doing the traffic, all of that. I learned how to renew our license. So there was quite a bit, and there's a lot to the business of running a radio station. So, in addition to the radio station, I am a county commissioner. I was elected in 2018. I am serving what will soon be my third term. I'm running unopposed this time for re-election. I handle portions of Muscle Shoals, Sheffield, Tuscumbia, Leeton, and part of the county. It is an awesome responsibility, and I take it very seriously. So I really enjoy doing that. In addition to that, I am serving my 12th year as president of the Tri-County Branch NAACP. That's Lauderdale, Colbert, and Franklin. I think we are the only branch in the state of Alabama with 3 counties. We were chartered in 1965. We advocate on behalf of anyone whose rights have been violated in any way. So whether it be in the workplace or in a school setting or in a business, we work to right wrongs. We build bridges with members of our community, with law enforcement, with the court system, with employers, with educators, superintendents, on down, to create a safe space for conversation so that we can fix it when it's broken. That's what we do. To that end, we have lots and lots of folks calling all the time about things that are going not well, or things, or that they talk about the triumphs as well as the tribulations. We have a website, www.naacptricounty.org, and we communicate with our community in that way. People are able to submit complaints for redress, and then they're able to see the other communities that we have. So whether it be housing or education or voter activation, voter registration, all of that we do. That is just one other hat. In addition to that, I serve as the chair of the largest tourism attraction in Northwest Alabama. That is the WC Handy Music Festival. It's held every year in July. I have been chairing it since 2004, but I was actually involved when it first began back in 1982. I was a kid. I was an intern. We were on the phone. We had folding chairs, folding tables, and yellow pages, and we would call and say, "Hi, we'd like to solicit your support for the WC Handy Festival." The what? Yeah, you're going to love it. It's going to be great. So, and today, well, pre-COVID, we were at approximately 300 different activities happening in 8 to 10 different cities and towns in Northwest Alabama. COVID hit us hard. We had a virtual festival. I called it the Handemic Festival instead of pandemic, instead of handy. It was the Handemic Festival. And we did everything pretty much online. And that meant telling the story of William Christopher Handy himself, who was born in Florence, Alabama. You will remember that George Floyd was murdered. We wanted to talk not just about his contributions to the music world, but also what he faced, what he dealt with as a black man in that period in our country, yes, and what was going on. So we had an in-depth conversation about the climate at that time. And it was good, and it was online so that people could still see something about William Christopher Handy. And then we had a couple of performances, where we would go in wearing our masks, and then we spread out. And one was at a converted church with a sax player and Harvey Thompson, who I showed you earlier. We'll call him Junior. his dad, Harvey Thompson Sr., traveled around the world. He played sax with Lyle Lovett and some others, but he was actually one of the original Muscle Shoals horns, and they played for everybody from Elton John to the Oak Ridge Boys. So, but we had, Harvey was featured in every Handy Festival from 1982 on until we lost him. So the Handy Festival is one that's close to my heart. I've been overseeing that one for quite a while. I have been the board president a couple of times, but that's for the Music Preservation Society, which is the umbrella under which the Handy Festival falls. We are back to maybe 270 events at this point. So that's a year-round thing. As I serve on the Black Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, so I get to travel around. We have meetings, and we just had a retreat earlier this week, as a matter of fact, in Birmingham, where we're talking about how we can encourage more Black business and assist them with sustainability. We want to make sure that not only are they created, but they are able to last and be successful. So we first of all, we are working together. Those of us who are members of the group are, for the most part, Black business owners. So we are able to kind of share ideas and feed off of each other and support one another. And so that's a very good thing. I am a member of the SDEC. I'm an elected member of that, the State Democratic elected. The State Democratic Executive Committee, edit that out. We don't want Dr. Joe Reed mad at me. So, all right. So I'm an elected member of the State Democratic Executive Committee. Have been since 2018 on that one. Before that, I was an at-large member appointed. We are working toward making sure that this remains a two-party state, at least. We need to have diverse ideas. We need to make sure that our voices are heard when we have a Republican supermajority. And I know some very good Republicans. I know there are some. All of them are not Donald Trump. But it's important that we talk about challenges and issues, and that we find solutions, and that we remember that we have more in common with one another than we have that divides us. And sometimes that message gets lost. We're very, very partisan now, and the state is very partisan. So what can we do about that and make sure that that common sense doesn't get lost in the noise of it all? I do a talk show here at the radio station on 9 on weekdays called A Look at the Shoals. I've had the pleasure and honor of interviewing all kinds of folks, both locally and nationally. One of my proudest moments, when I almost became a fangirl and had to kind of pull it back in, was interviewing Ambassador Andrew Young. That was an amazing conversation. I was told prior to going in that we would have about 15 minutes max, but Andy started rolling, and we started, we talked about everything under the sun. And so I tried to wind him down. I said, well, Ambassador, I know you were limited on time. Oh, yeah, but let me tell you this story. And so it was a great conversation. I interview artists, so Eddie Levert, Angie Stone. I could name drop for quite a while because I've had, the pleasure of knowing so many of them. I worked in Atlanta. I left here because I thought the grass has got to be greener. There's more to the world I've got to go see. So I left and I went to Atlanta, and I ended up doing voiceover. I worked at a company called On Mic Productions. We did commercials all over the world. We had Choice FM in London. We had stations in Jamaica. We had stations everywhere. I remember spending an entire morning explaining that no one does it like the bull, Schlitz malt liquor, for hours. But I remember just the fun of that, and being in a house with what was family, and being able to create these wonderful commercials that were then heard at radio stations around the country. That was a very good experience. While I was in Atlanta, I also worked at a law firm, but I did that because while I was here, before I left, I worked at a law firm. My dad had a meeting with someone who was running for a circuit court judge, And he came in with a fellow who later became the president of University of North Alabama. His name was Robert Potts. Robert had run for Alabama State Supreme Court. He had served as the head counsel for Alabama, University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. So he was a pretty amazing guy. But he was here, and he and Dad are talking, and my dad said, well, you know, my daughter said she was going to go to law school one day. And Robert said, well, she should come over to the law firm and get her feet wet. And my dad said, that sounds like a good idea. And I was like, hey, I'm right here. But I ended up going, and I learned quite a bit. And as a result of that, when I moved to Atlanta, I ended up working at a law firm over there, and we prepared the city for the Olympics to come in. We bought property. I ended up doing a lot of title searches and that kind of thing, and just shepherdizing cases and all that kind of thing, and just living in one of the most exciting cities, I think, that there is. You know, it's one of the best. There was jazz, there was hip hop, there was all kind of music. You know, you got black people who are just proud to be black, just doing things and owning their own and whatever. And I loved that because it was kind of what I'd grown up with. My dad was one of those people who wasn't content to work for someone else. He wanted to have his own, and knew just enough to be dangerous in about every arena there is. And my dad, I used to say, and I still say, that my dad was an eagle who soared high. My mom, however, was a wind beneath his wings. And she was the one who was practical. He was the idealist. She was a realist. He was the one that would come up with this crazy scheme to do something, and she was the one with good credit. So there was just, I hope that I'm a combination of the two of them. Sometimes I think I'm more my daddy's daughter. Bless my mama's heart. So, but there are a few other hats that I wear as a result of being on the commission. I am the commission's elected representative on several other boards. So those include Colbert Animal Services, for heaven's sake. And so I'm the president of that board. When I was commission chair, I reactivated what was then the jail committee, and I changed it to the Justice Center Committee. I thought it was high time we addressed the overcrowding that we have in our county jail, but also what could we do to reduce recidivism? What could we do to give job skills to these inmates, to give them an option to do something else? You know, you got to be smart to sell drugs. You got to know your math. You got to know how to measure. You need to know some things. If you can do that, you can run another business, a legal one. So how do we help you get there? So I think that, you know, I'm blessed to be in positions where if change can be affected. I believe so. And so, you know, God gives you talents. He gave one man what the master gave one man 5 and one man 1. You know, you gonna bear it, or what you gonna do? So, my job is to do what W.B. Du Bois said. If you're gonna be one of the talented 10th, you have an obligation to the other 90%. You know, so that's my job. There are a few others. I sometimes I forget the hats I wear. Dr. Joe Reed did appoint me to be on the executive committee for the SEC. So. Those are some things I do on the state level. On the local level, we have the Colbert County Democratic Executive Committee, and I serve as secretary for that. I serve as a board member for Inspiration Landing. That is a resort that we're thinking about, that we're working toward building in Sheffield. I'm looking forward to that happening. I serve as president of the Sheffield Redevelopment Authority. That is an organization that encourages economic growth and, you know, business. We try to attract and then retain businesses in the city of Sheffield to help build that economic base. So I have a meeting with them next week. I do a few other things, wear a few other hats, but that kind of covers it. Oh, I think I mentioned earlier that we're working on Leeton Training School. So I am secretary for the LCCID, SA, Leeton Colbert Community Improvement District, yes. So, yeah, I just wrote the bylaws for that.
How could you imagine this area would be if he made the decision to stay in Huntsville, Madison County?
He loved the Shoals. So I don't think that he would have. I think it was intended. It was meant that he would come back here and bring whatever gifts, whatever talents, whatever knowledge, whatever experiences he had to make this a better place for the people he cared about the most. His family, his friends, the people that he grew up with, He was all about making the Shoals area better. My dad was a pioneer, though, and he was fearless. He would try pretty much anything. He was one of the first to have a record store in the Shoals area. All right, he was. If he saw something that hadn't been done, so not only was he the first black policeman ever hired in Huntsville, and then later the first police chief of Triana, Alabama, and ended up in Ebony magazine as a result of that. It was interesting. It was fascinating. My father could go comfortably from the governor's mansion, and there are photos of him at the governor's mansion, but then he could be at the pool hall, and that's what made him relatable. And that is why they knew that they could trust him to have their best interest at heart, because he was one of them. He was of the people, not just for, but of the people. And I think that is why he excelled in the ways that he did. He would see a need. For example, I was telling you earlier about him writing the letter to the governor of Alabama saying, there's not, you're not doing anything for small businesses. You're not doing anything to support small businesses. You're spending a good deal of our taxpayer dollars offering incentives to these major corporations, but collectively small businesses employ more people than these larger corporations do. What are you doing for small business in the state of Alabama? And Governor Fob James said, you're right. So he created the Small Business Administration, and my dad became the first black person to serve on an Alabama governor's cabinet. So he saw a need, but it wasn't just a more global like that. It was also very localized, his vision. So for example, I remember there's a gentleman named Dick Cooper. Dick is a white guy who had been working. He worked with Bob Dylan, everybody, but he had an opportunity to go to Nashville, and that fell through. And so he's jobless and he's about to lose his home. And my dad hears about it and he said, you know what? Why don't you come on over to the radio station? And you ever sold advertising? Maybe you could sell some advertising. So he came over, and Dad gave him 2 of our top accounts. He said, now, you'll get your commission from that. That'll help you pay your house note. And Dick never forgot it. But one day, Dad was here and he was on the air. Dad was holding down the board because someone was ill. And Dick came in and said, well, Mr. Bailey, what are you doing on the radio? Not that Daddy couldn't, because he would rhyme and everything. He would do all kinds of things. But he said, well, so-and-so couldn't come in today. He said, well, do you think you could do this? And Dick, who had never held an air shift, had never worked the board, said, you watched him for a few minutes. He said, I think I could handle it. So Dick gets on the radio, and Bob Carl goes and does something else. And, Dick decides he needs to sound black, and so he called himself Barely White. so lowered the voice and everything. But Dad gave people chances. But Dick also told me a story about a man that Dad had heard about who was living in a house that was not weatherproof. Wind was coming in through the windows. It was freezing. It was cold as cold inside the house as it was out. And Dad knew that this man had a coal heater, but he didn't have any coal. And he'd gone to a coal yard and arranged for them to bring a truckload of coal to this man's house, and didn't tell Dick where they were going. He was like, oh, what are you doing? Well, put on your oldest clothes, and you got something old in your car, and I got something in the trunk. Okay, put that on. Come with me. And he said they went over there, and they began to put coal in this man's yard. And so it was. And he said the man almost cried. And this is Dick telling this story, not my dad. My dad didn't tell me this story because he didn't brag a lot about the things that he did for people, but he did a lot. I've had people come to me after he was gone to tell me that he had paid their utility bill, or he had paid their rent, or he had paid their whatever, help their kid get to school. He took kids to school, away to college. It was interesting the other day. about a week ago, there was a gentleman, an older gentleman who lived in the Shoals, an older preacher, who passed away. And I remember Dad doing this, so I knew he was telling the truth about it. But after I got back here, after my father died, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But when I got back here, my phone rings, and Dad used to call people if someone needed something. If Dad didn't have the money in his pocket himself, or if he didn't have enough, he would call community leaders, and he would say, "All right, this person's over here. She's got 3 little small kids at home. You know, they're about to lose, you know, their utilities, and we need to go and pay that off. And I've got the first 100. I need 100 from you." And he would call 2 or 3 people and say, "I need another 100 from you, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to help this person." And they would do it. And so not long after Dad was gone, you know, my phone rang down here, and it's this old preacher saying, "All right, so and so's got a problem. I got the first 100 on it. Your daddy used to call me. I'm calling you now." And I'm like, "Oh my God!" but these are the kinds of things that he did, you know, as a matter of course. And so, do I think the Shoals would be the same place? No, I don't. I know that there were people who ran for elected office who would contact him and ask for advice, not just how do I get black folks to vote for me, but how do I craft my my platform? What do I say? How do I, you know, how do I become effective? And after they were elected, those conversations continued, and that's something I learned from my father. So I build bridges with people. He built bridges with people, and they're not always people who look like you. They're not always people who think like you, but you can't effect change if you're not willing to have these conversations, if you're not willing to open that door and keep that door open and say, "Hey, this is not about this or that, it's about this." And at the end of the day, people are like, "Whoa, you know what? That makes sense." And you can make a difference. You can. So do I think the Shoals would be the same without my dad? Absolutely not. Even if it were just the music thing. Rick, it was my father who introduced Jimmy Hughes to Rick Hall. It was my father who said, you know, this guy can sing and he's got a great song. And Rick wasn't, you know, at first Jimmy wasn't intending to sing it himself. He was intending to sell it for someone else to sing. But the engineer came in over at Fame Studios and said, "Hey, you should put it out with this guy's voice on it." And Rick Hall said it outsold their ability to manufacture enough product to keep up with the demand. So they ended up on VJ Records, which was at that time a black-owned record label out of Chicago, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And they outsold with Steal Away, Jimmy Hughes. It outsold the Beatles that year in the United States.
Which maybe had the contract of the Beatles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I know. So there's so much. There are so many stories. My dad was one of the first black licensed car dealers in the Shoals area. So I have the bill of sale for when he sold Percy Sledge a car, or when he sold, yeah, he helped somebody else get a car. You know, all these different people. There were folks who could do well in their area, and he would know enough or have enough connections to help them in their area. So, for example, the first black-owned car dealership in the Shoals area was Shoals Ford. It was owned by a fellow named Fred Lee, and my dad was silent partnering with him. You know, so there was a time when the first black lawyers, attorneys, came to the Shoals area. They were based in Florence, Alabama. My father paid for their secretary for a year. He paid her salary for a year because they were just getting started, and he believed in them. He was so proud to have black attorneys in this area. He used to work with a fellow who had a black newspaper, kind of like Speaking Out News, but it was here in the Shoals area. So there were just so many things that he would help others to do. It wasn't all about him excelling or him succeeding. It was about him helping others to do the same. And so I think that's important, and I think it maybe kind of informs how I am, why I am, because I watched him be that way. Yeah.
This 52-year-old legend of a radio station
Mm-hmm.
has meant a lot to the area and has made a lot of progress in this area.
Mm-hmm.
But with technology changing
Mm-hmm.
And consumers finding other ways to listen, how do you see the future of WZZA? And I say that because car manufacturers have announced that because of the new EV
Yeah, we're
vehicles?
fighting that. We're fighting that. And that's one of the reasons you have to stay connected, not just locally, but nationally. Our voices are louder when they're collective, right?
Yes.
So we've talked about this. We don't need them to take AM radio out of cars. That's ridiculous. When we just had, not so very long ago, tornado. We're in a tornado alley. Tornadoes came through and tore up Phil Campbell. Guess what they were able to hear? AM radio. Okay, that's what they were able to pick up. And so there were, and the fellow who does engineering for me now was down there broadcasting and making sure that the messages got out. This is where you can go to get resources. This is where you can go to get supplies. This is what we don't need to. There should have been support for AM all along. There was not.
Yes.
There are people who will dismiss it, which is just sad, because it's our history. It's part of our history, but it also still has a very important role, as I've just demonstrated. But I also recognize that sometimes the people who are in decision-making positions haven't had their boots on the ground, and so they don't know. And so there are decisions sometimes made that I have no control over influencing. To that end, we have, and technology has changed, as you mentioned, but other things have changed too. It used to be that this radio station was heard clearly all throughout Northwest Alabama, into Tennessee and Mississippi, okay? But, and it's not just, topography, it's you got wires and cables and, interference that didn't used to exist that prevent an AM signal from traveling as far as it used to. So we have been for years streaming. So people can hear us not just throughout the Shoals area, on their phones, in their cars if they use their Bluetooth radio, but they can hear us around the world. And we've received phone calls from Australia, hey, I'm listening to y'all right now. Or I've got a letter on my desk from Italy asking for bumper stickers. I've got an email that I received before the war broke out from Ukraine. Like, hi, we're listening to WZZA, can you send us this and whatever. So I know that people are hearing us around the world, and that's a good thing. There are other changes that we're making. We're still growing, we're still improving, we're still evolving a little bit, and it's going to make life a little bit better for us here because people will be able to hear us a little bit more clearly.
How do you feel about the point that there is modern technology that can change AM radio? Just the medium of the signal itself, the sound can be encoded and sent through the airwaves and decoded and give you clear CD quality sound, but the FCC will not progress on that.
Part of that is their lack of understanding. Part of it is their lack of engagement with it. And then part of it is us not telling our story as effectively as we should to them. Mm-hmm. And that means that we need to be lobbying. As an elected official, I can tell you that I don't know everything about everything. And sometimes I'm dependent upon, I'm relying on my constituents to come and say, let me educate you about this particular issue so that you know more about it, so you can make an informed decision when you're in your commission meeting. And that's necessary on every level of government. So it's necessary with the FCC. We need to tell our stories. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to react rather than be proactive. We have a tendency to complain about something after when we should be in the room saying, oh, is that where you're planning on going? No, let's switch direction. You need to go here instead. And that takes time. And I understand that everybody can't take off and go and have these conversations face to face. God knows I am swamped, so it's very difficult to do this. But I think that one of the reasons I appreciate RMLC, the Radio Music Licensing Committee, is that they can advocate for radio around the country. So I remember having a debate with ASCAP. I remember having conversations with BMI. I remember, going, you're asking for this and you're charging us too much. And if it had not been for RMLC, we wouldn't be where I have a credit balance with BMI right now because they were able to negotiate, So I think that we need more organizations like that. We need to join together and fight collectively, raise our voices collectively so that we can be heard. And it is also going to take a little bit more we have to figure out a way to tell our story so we can garner the reaction, the response that we need. And that means sometimes breaking it down, saying, here's what happened. Here's the reality of what you just said or what you just did, or the decision that you're about to make. Here's how it will impact someone. You know, you don't, I'm thinking right now of rural hospitals closing, right?
Yes.
Because Alabama's not funded them the way they should. You have someone who is pregnant and is about to have a child and maybe has had a troubled pregnancy, having to drive an hour to get to a hospital. Okay? That makes no sense. And I think that sometimes the folks who are making these decisions aren't thinking about the result